Hey guys, welcome back to Burnout's Hot Rod Shop. On this episode, we're going to remove the 2-barrel intake from this 429 and put the dual 4-barrel tunnel ram that I have for it on here. Do a nice test fit, see how it's going to look, see how it's going to sit with the cab. I'll go through a few pointers of doing this along the way, and stay tuned. It's going to be an awesome episode. All right, so a couple pointers right off the bat. On these 429s, it is a wet intake. Make sure you drain the antifreeze. I opened up the petcock on the radiator last night, just left it open, drained the antifreeze out of the radiator. That should get us low enough that it's not going to have an issue with the intake. Next up, one thing I like to do is find my number one spark plug. So here's number one. Follow the wire around, it's right there. Pop the cap. I want to set it to top dead center for number one on the firing order. That way I know I'm there. I can get it dialed in when I put the distributor back in. Just use an extension down the spark plug hole, find the top of the piston, back and forth, and be able to dial it in and drop this in right at the firing on number one. Then I know I'm good to go. That way I don't have to remember what I had getting ready to fire. For me, that makes a ton of sense. I know some people do it that way, some don't. They'll just mark, if you mark off a place to show where it was pointing. So a tape line on a valve cover, radiator, that kind of thing. Me, I'm going to go top dead center number one. Another thing to understand is when you're putting a distributor back in, any of these plug wire positions can be your number one cylinder. So out of the box, a 385 series Ford, this is number one. But I wasn't sure where I was at. This engine had been sitting for years. So I found a top dead center on the number one cylinder. Unfortunately, it was on the exhaust stroke, which has it 180 degrees off. So once I found it, I made that the number one plug wire for this setup. Now, whenever I put it back in, I may rotate it back around just so it's in the standard position. But if I put it in over here and said, oh, I'll just make that number one, that's fine. Just know to keep running the circle the way the firing order is, and you'll be fine. It doesn't matter which one you take to number one, just so long as you have them in the right order. So having said that, I'll put you guys on some high speed here, and I'll start taking this thing apart, and we'll see if we can get this 2-barrel intake off of here. Stay tuned. All right, guys, we're back. We got the 2-barrel intake off. This thing sat since the 80s until a year and a half ago. So a little crusty on the water pump, or on the thermostat, but it functioned. I was amazed. It was actually letting water cycle. We do know that from running it. Let's take a look in here. We get down in there, the cam looks good. Yeah, well, maybe not so much. This engine had roughly 100,000 miles on it, if I remember correctly. It was our daily driver back in the 70s and early 80s. Little kludgy in there from all the paraffin-based oils back in the day. I will give my dad a little bit of a hard time and say, we pulled the 460 out of the 71 Mark III. We pulled the intake off of that. And it had 84,000 miles, I think, at the time. And it was clean under here. And I pulled the 2-barrel intake off of my son's Torino that has a 351 Cleveland. And it was clean in here. So, Dad, I think back in the 70s, you weren't as on top of the oil changes as you should have been. But they do tell you, never trust buying a car from a mechanic because theirs is the last one to get serviced. And I think that's what we're seeing right here. Theirs is the last one to get serviced. I think this one, we'll be able to put the intake on, run it around a little bit, and in a couple of years, probably pull this engine out and do a complete refresh on it. That's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see if it was like get it a couple of years, do a complete refresh, or what. So we'll set that other intake on and see how she's going to fit. And look at that. That's going to sit just about right. I didn't put the distributor or anything in. I've got an OEM style points distributor that will go in it. I fiddled with it a little bit, but it's got to come back out anyway to hard set this, and I wasn't going to go through the frustration of getting everything to line up, only to take it back out. When we look out the windshield, that's what we see. That looks cool. So there you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Burnouts Hot Rod Shop, where we test fit the YN Tunnel Ram onto the 429 going into this 46 Ford pickup. Hey, look at this. That's pretty cool, right? Comes up just enough. If I want to do a scoop or something, that's going to sit even a little bit higher. It's not going to be obnoxious up here. It's going to be nice and down here. Give us that performance rat rod look. So stay tuned for the next episode. We'll start doing some more work on this 46 Ford pickup on Burnouts Hot Rod Shop.